trying to get us to understand, to appreciate what it must have been like for the disciples between the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus and his ascending into heaven, and to get an idea of the problems they faced, because the problems that they faced in that 40-day period of time are problems that you and I face in ways, and there are difficulties that we have. And today I want to talk about hope deferred, because in those 40 days, the hope that the disciples had, their exhilaration over thinking that Jesus was going to save them in the moment, the restoration of the kingdom, those hopes were dashed for them, and their hope was deferred. And so I want to reflect back on a proverb and its application and implication for all of us. And that proverb is in Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 12. Because I would dare say that all of us have had a few hopes in our lives that were dashed, that were deferred. And we might even have hopes today that we would like to come to pass, but we recognize, or we have a feeling that it's not happening in this moment, and that we're waiting on something in the future. So the proverb reads this way in Proverbs chapter 13 and verse 12. And then we're going to use this proverb to take a look at the time in which the disciples were talking about. So the author here writes in Proverbs 13 verse 12, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, for a longing fulfilled is a tree of life." And so it follows that up. So if we would ask ourselves about the hopes that we have had in our lives, how many of those hopes have been dashed, deferred, or we've just totally given up on over a period of time? I think as a young man growing up, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to be this or I'm going to be that. I thought as a young man getting married that, everything would, my hope was that things would just go this way, and here's how my kids would be, and I would, hope that they would be really smart, and I'm not saying they're not, but I have these hopes. You have this house, you have these dreams, you have all of these things, and that your relationship with your spouse will just be not only hopeful, it'll match your desires. It'll come. And, well, I'm not going any further in that, but there are other hopes that we have. Sometimes you think, well, I hope that I could have a good job. I hope that I would have health. I would hope, and we hope for other people as well. It's the thing about hope is that it is something that we share with other individuals. We have hopes for other individuals as well. Well, let's go back here now to the disciples, though, because they had an incredible hope. They had been looking forward for such a long time for this magical Messiah. I say magical Messiah because it was going to be the answer to all of their problems. And you have to put in here that when we think about a Messiah, we think about what the Messiah meant to them. They did what all of us do. We add to that hope and what it's going to look like for us, what it was going to look like for Israel, what it was going to look like for the disciples. And so even when we look at the night that Jesus was betrayed and that period time setting, the disciples who were his main core of characters, some of them had hopes of being pretty high in his government. Who's going to be first and who's going to be second, and I hope, that I'm chosen for this. There are hopes that they had at that particular time. Then you think, okay, we're God's chosen people, and we have hopes of this and hopes of that as well. So we add to our hopes, and this is the way that our hope will play out for us. So I'm just suggesting that when they thought about the restoration of Israel, They could hope that the city of Jerusalem would be this fabulous, be rebuilt. The temple would be even greater than it was before. They would be a people who had power, who had might. They would be able to do all of those things, and the Messiah would do all of that. So when we begin looking at the proverb, we think we like our hopes to be fulfilled quickly, and most of our hopes we want to be fulfilled in our lifetime. We live in a world of self-gratification where people have hopes and people work real quickly to try to get their hopes taken care of. Deferred means though drawn out, and that drawing out of a hope tends to depress individuals, and depression takes its toll, and Satan uses depression and discouragement as a major tool of leading us to doubt, despair, and all kinds of things. So, having said all these things and talking about, the period between the resurrection and the ascension, this certainly plays out here, and we're going to take a look briefly, and I know that we've been down this road, and I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek many, many times here in the last few weeks, but we're going to go down this road again, but we're going to take a look at how Jesus saw the mood and the attitude of the individuals after his death and before they fully realized his resurrection and the like. So in Luke chapter 24 and verse 21, we read this. Jesus is talking to these individuals, and he is getting information from them, and this is what they say. But we had hoped, and that's past tense. We had hope that he was the one who is going to redeem Israel. So let's take a look at the hopes that we have, because in this statement, there are two lost hopes that they had. One is the hope that he, Jesus, is the one. Kind of reminds you of marriage. You hope you get the right one. He is the one. But in this particular case, we're hoping for the Messiah. He is the one. And all that Messiah incorporated. Secondly, their hope was in the redemption of Israel. So they had hope there. And you and I have, when we think about governments, we have hopes, and even politics, we think about the hopes that we might have and how things will play out and the like. Now, but the result of their hope was this. They were discouraged, they were doubting, they were depressed, and they were despairing. And Jesus tells them, reminds us of this in verse 17 here, because when he walks up to them, and what he says to them in verse 17, he asks them, what are you discussing together as we walk along here? Let's see if I'm in Luke chapter 24. And there's where he says here, that they were sad, is what it says here. Oh, they stood still and their faces were downcast. Now, they were a sad lot. This is what is recorded. Now, so we see this, that they're sad in the moment. And what is the manner of their communication was also expresses their sadness. What we see here in verses 14 and 15, as they were walking and talking with each other about everything that had happened. This is the thing about hopes that we have. We discuss those things, and as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus came up to them as they walked along. And now, again, looking at the King James Version, it says, as they reasoned among themselves. This is the thing about hope. You're thinking, how did this happen? Why did this happen? When is things going? They were confused, and they were discouraged, and they were depressed. That's what you find, the reasoning, because without hope, we reason in the negative. If there's no hope, that's what we call the funny thing about hope, is that when we hope, we reason in the positive. We think in the positive. They were reasoning in the negative. And they were their communication, I'm going to suggest, we're pulling each other down. Their sadness, because other people's sadness, other people's depression pull you down. Have you ever tried to encourage a depressed person?
Feeling the blues today, or tired of life already? Do you have questions about life, or need spiritual advice? The Worldwide Church of God is located in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto, California. We welcome everyone to attend our worship services with us every week at the times listed on your screen.